Hello, YouTube. So, Sandro and Marco earlier today came on to address multi-crew trolling. What this is people who are joining ships, shooting stations, causing then the helmsman to basically get a rebuy, firing off shield cell banks at inopportune times to either fry the ship, possibly destroy it, or at the very least, rob the helmsman of shield cell banks whenever they critically need it in a fight, or going to an exploration ship and, say, firing off all their heat sinks, things of that nature. And he responded today by saying the concept of multi-crew at its core is about cooperation and trust. If folk are going to troll each other, there's a limit to how much protection we can or should put in place. To a certain extent, yes, but this is also a missing feature that many of my friends and I noticed even in Beta 1. That I was flying my cutter, I had a pair of missile launchers, seeker missiles, and pulse laser turrets. And my friend who was in the pulse laser turret was like, I think you get better use out of the missiles. Especially since I could do module targeting or subsystem targeting, and he couldn't. And I went, okay, well, let me look over on the fire groups panel and see if there's a way to, put it back to under helm control. And the answer to that was there's no option. And that kind of surprised us, because whenever we're thinking about key functionality that you would need for a minimally viable product called multi-crew, the ability for the helm to designate what is and is not under their control and under their gunner and crew control would be one of those critical features that one would expect to have there, and it's missing. And then this just kind of goes into that vicious cycle that seems to be feeding about itself in this feedback loop of a poorly thought out, poorly executed feature that then is lacking critical functionality, is a reason why nobody uses it, and since nobody uses it, they won't spend any time or effort to go back and resolve those issues, and then just move on to the next feature, which is half-baked, poorly implemented, and it's rinse, lather, and repeat. It's a cycle that we've seen repeated now enough that we can say it is a problem. And I think that this is kind of the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back, that this is where the people start to stand up and say, look, you've had plenty of time now. Why aren't you even communicating that you acknowledge that some of these issues are even there, and tell us how you're going to resolve them? Because there's been this definite lack of communication over time. That FDev has been criticized. I defended them early on in development, but we're now far enough past the release of the game that if you're repeating the same mistakes over and over again, something's got to change. You can't expect to do the same things over and over again and get a different result type mentality here. But this gets better, because he goes on, and I'll post what was posted to Reddit here. And it says a little follow-up. He goes, first, I'm not ruling out adding Helm permissions for various module controls. Such additions will have to be judged against other work that's ongoing, but that's normal development. AKA, if not enough people are using multi-crew, we're not going to go back and fix it. Which, if it's missing features like the ability to lock down ship systems by the helm, nobody's going to be using it, or fewer people are going to be using it, and because of that, they're not going to go back and fix it. Again, it becomes this vicious repeating cycle, this negative feedback loop, for lack of a better term. But it's this next comment that I find to be really just, what? And he's talking about, dealing with trolls and stuff in general. It's definitely the kind of behavior that would warrant investigation when we get around to a karma system. No ETA, no guarantee, but it's on the big list. So you're telling me 3 years since I started playing this game in premium beta, or almost 3 years, that things like a karma system, which is something that is known that you need to have this type of reputation system with any multiplayer MMO-ish type game on the market, because as Rob Irving says, 10 to 15% of your player base are going to be assholes. He was a game designer for Ultima Online and in the early days of Star Citizen, before leaving to go form Descendant Studios and Descent Underground. And he's absolutely right about that. It's almost as though this didn't even occur to him, think that this could happen. And this is one of the reasons why I keep calling for a change in leadership roles, because it just doesn't seem like that he even gets it here. That if people are going to troll, it was never if, it was when. Anybody who's played any multiplayer games know this. Been on both ends of the stick multiple times. This is kind of multiplayer game design 101 type stuff. You know, Extra Credit does a lot of videos over these subjects. Maybe they need to subscribe to Extra Credits. Maybe learn a thing or two. But this answer is unacceptable 3 years later, 2 years into after release. You're telling me that at this point you don't know when a karma system is coming, or even if a karma system is coming that is more meaningful in terms of multiplayer gameplay? Really? Really? This is your response? It's unacceptable. 2 years ago, okay, when you're trying to map out the future, maybe an acceptable response. We don't know exactly when we're going to get to it as of yet. There's some other things we want to get to first. But as Season 2 has gone on for over a year now, and you can't tell me not only when, but if this is going to get addressed. As much shit as I love to give Cloud Imperium Games and Star Citizen, they at least acknowledged that these were going to be potential pitfalls and problems very early on in the development cycle, especially when Rob Irving was there. They addressed it in multiple episodes of Wingman's Hangar, and their proposed solutions to this was a Yelp-like user review system, so you could rate other commanders, or in that game, other players, and get an idea of whether they're good guys, bad guys, reliable, not, what have you. And then you had the idea of a very finite control system so that owners of ships could lock down what features certain players had access to. Now, whether or not they end up delivering upon those promised features or not is TBD. We don't know if Star Citizen will actually be able to implement and things that they have promised, but at least they can acknowledge that these problems exist and that they're trying to incorporate it in their design from the get-go. Here, it doesn't seem like this is even registered in their brains that this could be possible. It's as though they did not take that onion 2 or 3 layers deep to see where it goes. And that's wholly unacceptable for a game that has a multiplayer component. You can't half think out these things and then go, oh, well, unintended consequences, we didn't think about that, or that's not what we expected people to do. I mean, there's always going to be the element of people doing things you don't expect with software development and video games in general. But this is one of those things that, again, anybody that spent any time in multiplayer games would tell you this is basic 101 level stuff that just about every other major multiplayer game have implemented in one way or the other. The fact it took how long to even be able to block players from inside the game without having to go to the menu to do it and then try to remember the spelling of their commander name. You know, stuff like that just seems to be basic multiplayer 101 things that get glossed over, not thought about, not implemented at the beginning, and it's because of this and a repeating pattern of this that I say he needs to go. Again, I'm not entirely convinced that it is him. It may be others above him that are overruling him, but whether it's this is his design and these are the problems come from his thoughts about this, or whether he's unable to convince others above him that are overruling him on these things, is immaterial. Maybe it's time to get somebody else with a new, fresh set of eyes, a new voice that maybe can lead credence to, hey guys, there's some things here we should probably go back and think about seriously fixing. They still have 2.4. That's question mark, question mark, question mark. I've always taken that to be all the little things we would have liked to have got done in 2.0 through 2.3, but just ran out of time on the charts. And maybe that's when they're going to apply some spit and polish to these things. But if past behavior is indicative of future expectations here, I don't know. I don't really expect these things to be addressed because they haven't thus far. Not to say that they couldn't be. Not to say that Frontier could make a massive shift in priorities and see about addressing some of these things. But, you know, there's also been the lack of communication about this stuff. And, you know, an answer, we'll get to it eventually, maybe, was an answer that may have been acceptable 2 years ago during the early days of post-launch. Not 2 years later. 2 years later, that answer of yes, no, maybe, unacceptable. You need to show that you actually have a plan to deliver upon some of these things. And they are not communicating that plan to the user base. And again, I don't think that they're going to see this come home to roost, as it were, until Season 3 and lackluster sells if features continue to be half-baked, half thought out, because at that point, if you're going to be selling on a basically per feature basis, you're going to have to make sure that that feature is engaging, in-depth, has an element of complexity, and adds something of value to the game, and it's just not a half-thought-out placeholder, because people are going to stop giving you money because you don't seem to go back and replace placeholders with something better. You just seem to put in more placeholders. Again, this cycle of put in a placeholder. It doesn't work very well, but since nobody uses it because it was a placeholder, we're not going to go back and fix it. That logic is just horrendously, I don't want to say annoying, but almost amusing at this point. That I'm like, this is your logic? Really? Because I've had project leaders try that on me on companies that I've run. I fired their ass. It doesn't work with me. And when you have a significant enough portion of your player base who have been saying the same things for years, and you're not listening to your customers, eventually it comes to bite you in the ass. It doesn't happen today, it doesn't happen tomorrow. It happens 3 years from now when you've spent a bunch of money because you've had negative cash flow in between versions, and then you expect sales of 500,000 and you get sales of 50,000. That's when things pan out, as it were. And I think that's what's going to ultimately happen here. But maybe they'll prove me wrong. I hope. But I wish. I don't hope at this point. That's pretty much all I've got to say today.